Hi, I'm David Korn.
And I'm Jim Pinkerton.
Together?
And together...
We're bloggingheads.tv.
TV.
Once again.
Yeah, trying it a new way. I'm trying it from home, so we'll see. Hope this works. Otherwise,
and since that,
you'll have the whole session to yourself.
Well, since our viewers may not fully understand this, we can't see each other, so I don't see that Conan the Barbarian poster above the waterbed.
And I don't see the Karl Marx and
Buchanan. But in any event, it's been a long time, 2.5 months, I'm told, and there's just been such a demand for our return that we had no choice but to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, no choice but to believe them, I guess.
Yeah, yes. Anyway. So the public, the Vox Populi.
So David,
but it seems like for all the time we've been gone, we've only missed one story, which keeps going on, which is this.
Right, which we could wait. We could have waited another 2.5 months, and it would still be happening.
Unfortunately, yes, the BP oil spill, and I think the media narrative, as they like to call these things, has hit this trough where. Well, yes, there's yet a fourth or fifth Plan B they're about to try, but it seems the odds aren't good on this one. And then we're just going to have to sit tight through August while they drill 2 relief wells and try to intersect, 5 miles below the surface of the ocean, or actually a mile below, and then some distance beyond that, intersect the existing well with one of 2 other relief wells, and then clog it up somehow. But to me, what's been interesting is that this isn't. I don't think this is much of a political controversy yet. We can talk about whether you think Obama's blown it or not, and whether there are political consequences. But to me, from an ideological perspective, how does this fit into the conservative cliche of letting free markets work and things like that? I mean, it's not good for the Steve Forbes crowd, is it?
No, it's not. But let me get this straight. It's not a political issue, but it is an ideological issue.
I'm asking. I'm not sure yet. It's a political issue.
I think it is a political. I think it is both a political and an ideological issue. But I'll add another dimension, which is it's basically a technological issue. I think that, and again, we'll all have a chance to get our points across here. I think Obama is taking a hit. Not nearly the hit that Bush would have taken if he'd been president, or John McCain, but I think it is become political. But I freely concede that if there's ever an argument for government regulation, and effective government regulation conducted by people who aren't having affairs with the regulatees
and smoking crystal meth off toaster ovens,
right? This is it. But what just leaps out to me, though, is the kind of palsied, imagination that we have about how to approach these things. I mean, in the past, we've dug canals and built airports and highways and cities and put people on the moon. And now
this start singing once I owned a railroad. Brother, can you spare a dime?
I mean, it's once upon. I mean, now we're sending out people with mops and hefty bags to clean the stuff up. I mean, it's clearly there was grievous underthinking as to how we're going to clean this stuff up if it spills. There's 1,000 inventors who have been waiting, obviously not getting very far, with to pitch their idea on how to drill oil better or clean it up faster or whatever. And then there's another 10,000 inventors beyond them who have ideas for producing energy. I mean, I think that if the BP oil spill goes through August, I think I saw this on ABC News, it will still represent no more than all the energy that America consumes in a day, something like that.
Or nanosecond, or something.
Something like that. So in other words, our appetite for energy is humongous, and I'm
a little confused. I don't quite understand your point here. Is your point here that BP should have found oil another way? Is it that, I mean, obviously, they told the regulators, hey, we can do this, no problem, and if there is a problem, we know exactly how to fix it, and they were lying. the scoundrels were just simply lying about that. And there should be, I think, a criminal investigation to see to what degree of criminal liability should be imposed. Because if people knowingly lied or were grossly negligent, jail time is not out of the question for if you can assign culpability in a specific fashion.
I agree with you, and I would also say why is...
but it seems to me we've had a war on regulation for decades now, where the general conventional thinking has been, it just gets in the way. Regulators are just bureaucrats, these mindless bureaucrats who just want to get in the way of innovation and extraction. And you've had a series of administrations, including Democratic ones, but it's more egregious, I think, usually under Republicans, when people come in and they don't take this stuff seriously. They're just punching their ticket, going through the revolving door so they can go back to an oil company or a gold company or a coal company and make even more money or go on to become lobbyists. And, there's been this, there's been a paradigm, more on the right, though I would say that, some Democrats have paid at least lip service to it over the past few decades, that, we can beat up on government regulation. It's just a great piñata. And, we don't have to take it seriously. And now we see at least one of the consequences. I think there are lots of others, but this one is pretty hard to miss.
I basically agree with you. I would just add, there's two elements here. One is a conservative libertarian ideology that says all regulation is bad, that the market takes care of itself, which, I agree with you is not adequate to a situation like this. There's another sort of sub-ideology, though, which is that government employees should be insulated from, the ill consequences of their actions. That if they have a union and civil service or some variant on those, you can't fire them, you can't make them do anything, and if they are surfing for porn or smoking crack or flirting or worse with the people they're supposed to be regulating, you can't fire them. That's sort of the story of the federal government.
I think so.
It's not that most federal employees are on their way to a K Street lobbying job, because they're not. The story is that most federal employees are insulated from being fired if they do a bad job.
I think the folks who got caught doing drugs and trading sex in the MMS were indeed fired. I don't think the unions came to their protection. I don't think they'd want to. And the people I know who've spent years, decades as government bureaucrats tend to be pretty diligent and conscientious, and they're only there because they want to do the job, because otherwise they would be making more money in private practice. The lawyers working at EPA and the career people, it's really, it's the political people who come in and say, we're not going to send this regulation on, we're going to, we're not going to pick up this fight, we're not going to do this lawsuit. They're the ones who actually are looking either to help somebody get out into a better job, and who are not in it for the long run and have no incentive to do a good job. So,
well, again, I agree with that somewhat bleak assessment of the Schedule Cs as they come through most of these agencies. I agree. However, I would just point to you that it was a career staff at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, that was surfing for porn and all through the meltdown, and reasonable people can both contribute opinions on whether it was bad leadership from the Republican appointee Chris Cox, the chairman of the commission, or whoever the supervisors were. At the SEC. I mean, in the military, the one government agency where there is a real ethos of if you do a bad job, your career comes to an end. They would court-martial somebody at the SEC. Nobody got court-martialed at the Securities and Exchange Commission.
There are a lot of generals who still tend to keep their jobs after not winning wars and such. But nevertheless, we have too much agreement here.
But the point, I wanted to come back to the point where maybe you agree with this too, which is, I guess not the end of the world. And that is, beyond the issue of regulation, there's the issue of technology. And that is, where was the... if we wanted to construct a building, we wouldn't be sitting there with bricks and mortar. We'd be using cranes and machines and drills and so on like that. Where was the vacuum cleaner that would just suck up all the oil out of the Gulf of Mexico? Where was
you can ask Kevin Costner.
Well, exactly.
In case our viewers don't know, his brother owns a company that has invented a procedure that they think they can suck up the water and use a centrifuge and separate the oil from the water and kick the water back out. And they're talking to the appropriate authorities about whether it would be appropriate to use it. But I think that this is where I get a little confused. Where's the vacuum cleaner? Shouldn't BP have had a vacuum cleaner if they were going to try to do this in case there was a big oops? I mean, who are you blaming for the lack of a vacuum cleaner?
I'm blaming both the government and BP for not having the foresight to think that if you spill 100 million gallons of oil in the Gulf, or even 10 million gallons, or even a million, or even 1 gallon, you got to have an immediate, effective way of cleaning it up.
Well, I agree. I mean,
we don't.
To me, that goes back to a policy point of view question, not so much a technological one. You should put those demands upon industry, and then either they can come up with a vacuum cleaner or they can't. The demand should be there, and then it's up to them to figure out if they can meet that demand. In this case, that demand wasn't placed.
I agree with you, but as I wrote for Politico last week, I said engineers and scientists and technologists have not really been at the center of any important political debate in Washington since the Apollo program. I mean, it's what we have a town. This is Washington now, full of lawyers, politicos, and financiers. So we get lawsuits, political debates, and income transfers, and we don't get people discussing whether or not, and I emphasize the not part as well, Kevin Costner's brother has a good plan or not, or whether or not the other 100 plans are good. But David, you and I agree, and then we'll stop agreeing, that we need energy and we need it to be clean, and obviously the intellectual caliber of our leaders, and political leaders, and the sort of ethical caliber of our business types, at least at BP, is insufficient to this task. And so the result is a lot of dead birds.
Does that mean you're rounding the corner here to support Barack Obama spending $80 billion of the $800 billion stimulus on clean energy technology? I think that's good.
I've always supported clean energy research.
Yeah.
Again, the question is, I mean, again, if $80 billion means genuinely we're getting engineers to figure out how to make the best wind turbine, I'm all for it. If that $80 billion includes money for further research on global warming and cap and trade and things like that, then I'm not for it. But what I'm for is some sort of Teddy Roosevelt to Dwight Eisenhower, type emphasis on scientific technical progress. And I fear that Jim, current left and the current right don't think in those terms.
This didn't all come to a halt in the good old happy days of the 1950s as engineers were leaving Mel's Drive-In to figure out how to invent our way to the future. I mean, telecommunications and the internet, there's been a fair amount of innovation in the last couple of decades, even though there's been a rise in lawyers and lobbyists and policymakers in Washington.
You're right. There has been a rise in innovation, mostly in the private sector, on the telecommunications front in the last 40 years.
And that's driven by the military.
No, you're right, David. I said, last 40 years. I said, look, we both know the internet was created by the government. Hats off to the Pentagon for creating DARPANet back in the 60s and things like that. And then hats off to the Federal Communications Commission, frankly, mostly under Bill Clinton, as well as Reagan, both in the 80s and 90s, to say that now that the internet's been created and we've established the World Wide Web, we're going to back away from it and let it blossom. What there hasn't been an equivalent amount of forward progress on, for example, infrastructure. Nobody the same.
We're going back to flying cars here.
Well, we're going back to bullet trains. We're going back to all sorts of stuff. We're going back to smart cars that go at 100 miles an hour in convoy down highways, and there's a million different ways to. But
I'd love to see government spending money on scientific research that has these practical applications, particularly if they end up being. Call them cost savers in the long run. Inventing.
Well, that's my point, and the point is, I'm completely unaware that Barack Obama has given a wit of thinking to these kinds of challenges. I just don't see it.
Well, I think in terms of the stimulus spending, I don't think it's money on research. I think it's going out to light rail programs and solar programs and wind programs and trying to gin those things up.
But then there's the further issue of managing it properly, and we agree there's been a problem on that. And again, I just don't think that Obama's career as a political organizer and as a senator for a year and a half made him equipped to
well, I think he's certainly
to lead these challenges. This is not to say that
do you think
George W. Bush did a good job. It just means we haven't had any president who did.
Do you think Stephen Chu, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist, who's worked on? I think he did a lot of biomass work, but has worked on alternative energies, is not equipped to do this?
I think he is. But again, here we are, a year and a half into the Obama presidency, and 40 years into the history of offshore oil drilling. And we don't seem to have made any progress. Now, again, we've
made progress. We've made bad progress. I mean,
we've made right. We haven't made
positive progress. I mean, the part of the problem is they're using regulations of 1978 when the drilling was mainly, a couple of miles offshore and a couple hundred feet deep, not 42 miles offshore and a mile deep, and then you go a few miles below that. So
I agree with you.
There's a progress without responsible thinking attached to it.
David, take yes for an answer. I agree with you. I just think.
But it seems to me, I compared to recent presidents and political leaders, and I take a lot of issue with what some of the things Obama's doing. It seems to me he has paid more attention, has tried to put more resources towards alternative, energies, and it's not his job, I think, to be picking and choosing programs. But if you think Stephen Chu is a smart guy, well, then hopefully he's probably not picking either. But he's picking the people who are picking, and that seems to be a better system than we had under the last few presidents.
I tend to agree with you that Chu alone is a massive improvement. I mean, Chu, by the way, is pro-nuclear.
I'm not touting him for everything, but I just mean in terms of qualifications. He's the guy who's thought a lot about alternative energy.
Right, but what he's most qualified for as a physicist is nuclear stuff.
Well, I think he's done more work on biomass than other.
Well, yeah, but he won his Nobel Prize, and the point is, it's nuclear power that would save us from all this oil.
Well, then you should be happy with Barack Obama because
I am the problem, except for the huge fact.
You should accept a yes for an answer from him.
And you should just say that accept that he chose to make his signature energy issue the most idiotic thing ever, cap and trade, and that was a waste of a year. If he spent the last year helping situate, for example, I'll give him credit. I'll say this.
He has given. He's trying to speed up nuclear licensing for plants that still have tremendous safety issues. I mean, he's moving faster than a lot of people think he should on this. And of course, he was a big fan of so-called clean coal, which doesn't exist. But listen, from your perspective, Jim, I think you should be, giving him, a lot of credit. I think maybe wrongly, but I don't understand your beef with him on this front.
I said to Steve Clemens, my friend at the New America Foundation. Our friend Steve Clemens, in his blog, The Washington Note, I sent him a note, and he published it. This is maybe 2 or 3 months ago. That when they announced that nuclear plant in Georgia, and they said, this nuclear plant in Georgia is going to create, thanks to Secretary Stephen Chu, and whoever else, this nuclear plant is going to create, 300 jobs or whatever it was. I said, gee, if Obama had spent the last year announcing these kinds of things, he'd be at 65% popularity right now, instead of 40 or 45 or whatever.
Until we have a nuclear.
The thing is,
until we have a nuclear problem at one of these plants, and then we go back to the BP situation.
Well, we have a problem. Obviously, with any kind of energy has its downsides. What the American people reject, though, is somebody coming along and saying, "Look, drive less, take a bicycle." People just won't put up with it. So we have to solve what the environmentalists want, and rightly so, which is a clean environment, and the demands of the average American for a car, a way to get to work, and a way to get around, and that means energy. So we got to do both.
Well, we do, but people, you tell me, Jim. Looking at this spill, would it make you think twice about your own behavior when it comes to energy absorption? Will you turn off lights maybe more dutifully? Would you maybe say, well, it's a toss-up, perhaps I'll take the metro today?
I mean, look, I take the metro all the time.
Okay, well, I mean, a place where you can make a choice.
I've been known to turn the light off. Even as I talk to you, David, you don't know this, but I am poorly lit. We're
not talking about aesthetics here.
I like all those are issues, but again, the only thing I'll try and
leadership
we don't need to spend the entire hour talking about this, but I would just say this: these are technical issues. They're not conservative issues. They're not liberal issues. They're technical issues.
But wait a second. If they involve choices or trade-offs, then they become political issues. And it's not. It'd be great to. If we could. I think you and I would be both in favor of snapping fingers and creating new energy sources that are clean and plentiful. But until that happens, there are trade-offs. There are trade-offs for the environment. There are trade-offs of aesthetics, of health. You can deny global warming all you want. Most scientists don't. But nevertheless, that's a trade-off too. And so, it's like what they say about the economy. We'll just grow our way out of the problem. We may, if we can invent new technologies and get to that Star Trek future that we all yearn for, having grown up in the 60s. That'd be beautiful and wonderful. But at the time being, there are still hard choices to make. And I think, leadership is not just pandering to the needs of the public. I understand why that works politically, but it's also saying, let's see if we can reassess our needs, or what we think are our needs, and figure out if there's any other way to go about this while we get to that Star Trek future.
You may be a child of the 60s, as am I, but you sound more like the 70s when you talk like that. I think that's exactly what we've had 30 years of the left trying to do, which is lecture people on having less, and they keep rejecting it. So take the hint. People want more. The challenge is to figure out how to give it to them in a clean way. I mean, there was a big article in the LA Times the other day about a 3D printer. This is without trying to get too complicated here, we'll put the link up on the site, but it enables you to fabricate things just through a machine. It's exactly what George Jetson had, and if we somewhere in the 70s we lost the thread of infrastructure and gee-whiz production. And we won't get clean productivity until we get that spirit back.
You ran out and bought an iPad. You're at the cutting edge of gee-whizzery.
Well, but I can only buy what's available, and the only place where that explosion has continued unabated since the 60s has been consumer electronics and computers. It has not continued in the realm of flying cars and bullet trains and at-home production and energy production and so on. That's been my point. We've let it wither, mostly in the public sector, because on the one hand the Greens hate everything, and on the other hand the Libertarians hate it when the government doesn't.
But no,
and so between the Libertarians and the Greens, you have a fervent opposition to any public work project.
Jim, I think you're wrong. If you look at high speed or light rail. It's Greens and liberals who've talked about investing in mass transit. And then, your point is Americans want their big cars and don't want to be inconvenienced, and they want to be able to go from A to B without having to sit next to anybody else. And so that's what we should give them. But yet, it's Greens and liberals and progressives who have talked for decades now about mass transit. And you have people, up in, what was his name? Bob Moses, in that great book, The Power Broker, who was doing everything he could to kill train traffic on the LIE. You have corporations that Republicans seem to want to give more slack to than Democrats in general, not always, but in general, killing electric cars and cable cars in Los Angeles and other places. And it's been progressives that have said, wait a second, we want to preserve a mass transit infrastructure and be on the cutting edge. Like our friends in Europe.
First of all, a couple points. First of all, Fred Siegel, who is a distinguished urban scholar in his own right, says that Robert Caro is just dead wrong about Moses and the LIE. I mean, he's just incorrect in what he says. I realize every liberal read The Power Broker and came away thinking that Moses was some evil racist. I think Moses was a great man, and Fred Siegel is the
Moses built a lot of highways and not much mass transit.
Well, okay, we had a lot of New York had a lot of mass transit. I mean, look, I agree with you on mass transit. I agree with you on bullet trains, but there's another element here, which is there's a new line of thinking that my friend Mike Lind, also at the New America Foundation, has been pushing, among others, which says that the real sort of bullet train of the future is cars moving in convoy. There's a term for this which I can't remember right now, but it's basically the cars link up and they're computerized, and they just simply go as fast as you want to go, and you get there.
Like George Jetson bubble cartridges where you just
The point, as Mike says, the thing is, look, if you take a bullet train from here to St. Louis, that's great, but how do you get around when you get to St. Louis? And you sort of need your car, and you need a car, whether it's a taxi cab or a rent-a-car or something. So the further twist on the kind of Hamiltonian vision is not just mass transit, but it's mass transit including your car. Now, again, if the Greens are for that, then I'm all for it. And again, I'm personally for bullet trains. I think we should pay for bullet trains from here to Chicago.
Once again, we agree.
Orlando and things like that. But what I'd say to you, though,
is that the push for mass transit in general has come from the left, not the right.
Right, but the burden
and if you want to change mass transit to include plastic bubbles that hook up on the highways and then separate in cities, I'm fine with that too.
Okay, the thing is, I would say that the bulk of the environmental push in the last 30 or 40 years has not been to help people, is to build infrastructure. It's been to simply save energy. It's been to have just austerity.
See, but that's where I think you're wrong. I think the only voices for mass transit and for sort of sane urban planning that ties into efficient transportation have come from the left and not from the right. Okay. The right has basically said we don't care about public planning, we don't care about transportation infrastructure. We just want to deregulate everything.
Support for mass transit has a way of bleeding into new urbanism and so on, which people just don't like. I mean, people want their quarter-acre lot in suburbia. Joel Kotkin, who's
I don't think they want it as much now after the subprime crash.
I think they do. I think the impulse to have a yard for your kids is pretty darn powerful. And again, Joel Kotkin, K-O-T-K-I-N.
I know.
I'm just saying. I don't think he used to be at New America. I'm not sure he's still affiliated with New America, but he's got a blog called, I'm not even sure what it's called, but it's New Geography, I think it is. And he is brilliantly taken apart the conceit that we can dense pack people and that they'll agree to do it. You can dense pack people as we did with public housing, but the people in public housing won't like it. What people want, and again, the voters get a say in this, and in the end they tend to win, is they want the yard. They want sprawl. And so then you have to figure out, okay, how do you connect up people in their sprawl so that they're happy and that you're happy? And that I would submit to you is basically an engineering challenge. How can you have clean energy that allows people to live where they want to live and then get to where they want to go? It shouldn't be that hard.
Well,
I'm afraid, that doctrinaire Greens just don't believe in letting people do what they want to do, and therefore that's where the fight comes in.
If you could come up with a clean energy device or supply that would allow people to do this, that would not befoul the earth and create all sorts of assorted hazards, I don't think Greens would have a problem with that.
I wish I agreed with you. I wish I thought you were right.
You have this conspiratorial notion, Jim, that that all these Greens sitting in their dark, poorly lit, apartments or caves, and just rubbing their hands and saying, "How can we take stuff away from people?"
No,
that's what we care most about.
Their apartments are well lit. Have you seen Al Gore's house in California? The $9 million house in Montecito, California, which is next to Oprah. Have you seen that house? No, he's perfectly well lit. And the example. Let me give you an example.
They're not motivated by this desire that you think they have.
As somebody once said to me, an environmentalist is somebody with a house in the woods who doesn't want you to have a house in the woods. I think that's a pretty good assessment of the limousine origins of the environmental movement.
But I don't think you've spent enough time with environmentalists to make.
Well, okay.
I do. I
confess,
and that's not their attitude. And the environmentalists
hold on. What about?
I know. They compost. They buy Priuses. They do what they can personally to make things better. I mean, they go through their own little mini calculations, and then they're sitting there saying, "I want to, take stuff away from other people."
David, they may well, but when they're Washington, this wouldn't be the first time that their Washington public policy representatives have ill-served them. I grew up in college towns. I grew up with in Evanston, Illinois, which
Jim?
is full of saintly librarians who live in solidarity with the Sandinistas and the Earth and everything else in between. That's what I grew up with. But what's I think the paradigmatic example of this is the determined decades-long effort to block a wind farm off of the coast of Massachusetts. Because Teddy Kennedy and the rest of the Kennedy family didn't want to look at it from their multi-million-dollar high-end
listen, NIMBY, not in my backyard, is something that affects people on the right and the left on a host of issues, environmental and non-environmental issues, including the people who don't want to see prisons built in their backyards or halfway houses or anything else. That happens. You can't point to that as your example of the true conspiratorial design here that environmentalists have, that their motivation is to impose austerity, and they don't care whether there's clean energy or not.
That's where we disagree.
Okay.
I think you
need to get out.
There's plenty of evidence to support the idea that they just believe in austerity. Many of them believe in austerity for the sake of austerity. They believe they're sympathetic to deep ecology, and they just think that people have too much.
I think you're really confusing the EDF with Earth First, and there are miles and miles between
the two. I agree they are miles and miles apart, but the problem is that. And then the further sinisterness of it all is that something like cap and trade gets hijacked by Wall Street, and
it gets hijacked by your friends in the nuclear power industry. That's that's what it's been hijacked by.
The people who are going to make money on cap and trade were the same Wall Street traders who gave us some subprime mortgage meltdown.
Billions of you can call it pork or not if you want it for the nuclear industry. But let's move on because we've had this. Discussion, call it discussion, before. What's been in the headline in the hours before we came on and today has been this attack, or I guess you can call it attack, or the conflict between the Israeli military and this flotilla of 6 boats that were heading to Gaza with what they said was humanitarian supplies, trying to run the naval blockade that Israel has set up that prevents people from bringing in goods to Gaza on their own. The Israelis say you can give them to us and we'll pass them on. And in this, what was that? I think 9, 10, 11 people were killed. Apparently, there was only fighting on one of the 6 boats that the Israelis basically intercepted and took control of. So I don't know if you said you had written about this or you were planning to, but
I haven't written about it.
You said you had a point.
I did have a point, which is that once again, the Israelis had a respectable position, which is we should prevent the blockade from being penetrated. But obviously, they found a terrible way to go about interdicting the ships.
They did this in international waters, I should add.
And what was needed, and again, I think probably closer to shore, was a better system for interdiction. And so, again, the inner technologist in me says, where was the tractor beam? Where was the thing?
Where's the force shield?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Jim, we have to live in the world with the toys we have.
Well, no, you don't. You
at least at the time being.
That's where you're wrong.
I'm sure if someone, if there was an inventor out there who has invented the force field or the tractor beam, I'm sure many militaries, including the Israeli military, would beat a very quick path to that person's door.
But David,
DARPA has been investigating cutting edge technology. The CIA has done experiments in the past of whether you could kill a goat with your mind. There's plenty of stuff that goes on.
But David, you spent the last 30 years of your life opposing the Strategic Defense Initiative, right?
Well, I thought it's not going to. I thought it's a boondoggle.
Okay, well, you thought it was a boondoggle. Fine,
Yeah.
but the thing is, maybe the Men Who Stares at Goats was a boondoggle too. I mean, I suspect
it was, and it was probably less expensive though. But yes,
probably cheap. But the thing is, out of those efforts, out of the efforts to create electromagnetic
I was
or
never against
plasma
research.
fields,
It's about whether you're going to deploy things that actually work or not.
Again,
George Bush committed. The last George Bush committed to deploying systems that weren't even proven workable.
You research and you deploy, and then you deploy, and then you research.
Maybe you research and prove
if you're
first.
really determined to see something happen. We were researching and radar and the atomic bomb and stuff like that and started to build it long before we knew it would work.
I think we tested the atomic bomb before we used it.
Well, before we dropped it, but we started building all the facilities before we had any idea what we were doing. The thing is, the history of science tells you that you never quite know kismetically where your discovery is going to come from.
But that's true. But given that we still live in a world of limited resources, unless you want to start taxing the rich even more, you have to make smart decisions about where you're going to spend your money.
And let me give you two extremely stupid decisions. Okay, one is South Korea is a high-tech country, one of the most high-tech countries in the world. And yet they have let themselves become hostage to these evil, tyrannical nuts in North Korea, mostly because the city of Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, by bad luck, is like 20 miles away or 10 miles away from the North Korean border.
Spitting distance is the technical term.
Spitting distance. So, in other words, the North Koreans who are, low-tech Stalinists can, wreck Seoul, South Korea, and the South Koreans should have spent their time, some of their GDP, on some sort of force field or something to keep 20,000.
And what if the force field doesn't work?
Well,
it works in the Fantastic Four with the Invisible Girl, but I mean,
you test it, David. But we know electromagnetic
before
fields.
You said it worked. Actually, better yet to say we have it and it works without even having it. Just put a sign up like people do with alarm systems.
You can bluff. You can bluff if you want to. Okay, the Israelis, Israel, another extremely high-tech country. The greater economic output than all of its adjoining neighbors put together. Has built this wonderful military and things like that, but they forgot to defend their own home population, as we discovered in the Lebanon War 4 years ago, and as we discovered in various incidents since along the Gaza Strip and so on like that. If the people on that peace boat from Turkey or Cyprus or wherever it came from, posed a threat to Israel in the sense that they might have had some artillery piece or rocket or something tucked away inside that ship that could then be fired into Israeli territory, then the Israelis are put in an impossible situation of they have to intercept every last ship coming anywhere near into the Gaza Strip, and for that matter, Lebanon and wherever else. And that's obviously not tenable. I mean, there's going to be I think you and I would agree there's going to be a lot more of these peace ships.
I'm sure they're leaving port now.
I'm sure they're leaving port now. So the Israelis had better come up with a better plan for stopping them from getting to Gaza, or if the blockade of Gaza becomes impossible, as I suspect it will, if the Egyptians decide to stop cooperating and so on like that, and if the Israeli Navy just gets overwhelmed by freelance peace activists.
What if there's a flotilla of several hundred vessels?
Right. Okay. Then the absolute imperative to make Israel bulletproof or rocket-proof becomes just as strong for Israel as it does for South Korea.
Well,
by the way, next on that list is the United States.
I agree with you that there's an incentive here, but that doesn't mean you're going to actually find a way to build a force field. Police officers walk around with Kevlar vests, and they sometimes work, sometimes they don't work, and now we sell rounds, you can't see this, that are basically little missiles that go through them rather easily. And so while people are building force fields, people will be building rockets that go through the force fields.
Well, that's the nature of technology.
That is the nature of technology. So I'm sure, sword shield. We have yet to come up with a technological invention that is the last word when it comes to violence.
But the Palestinians, if there's a super high tech weapon to be invented, it won't be invented by the Palestinians or the North Koreans. the people who Israel's most worried about. It might come out of Russia or China or something like that, which is an issue.
That's what we said about Russia and China back in 1949.
What?
That they wouldn't be able to invent the atomic bomb.
Well, and I didn't say that.
Well, you were 2 years old at the time.
I wasn't born, neither are you.
But that's what people said at the time.
Yeah,
that was the assumption. So if you say, this is literally science fiction, if not fantasy, Jim. I mean, if someone invents a force field, someone will invent a way to penetrate the force field.
But you buy time, and you then can come up with all sorts of political mechanisms for dealing.
Why not come up with the political mechanisms first?
Well, because I don't think the North Koreans and the Palestinians and Hezbollah are interested in a political deal.
Well, right now it seems to me that listen, you get a force field out there, fine. I think the whole world will be really happy, and maybe you can start raising venture capital for that.
Well, the thing is, it's like a lot of things in this world. If you really put your mind to it, you can do it. AIDS, a great example of a technology that rushed into production because before anybody had any idea what they were really doing was the fight against AIDS. AIDS was discovered in 1981, and within 6 years, they had a medical treatment for it. A disease that they didn't even know about. In 1981, had AZT by 1987, and by the early 90s, you pretty much had a remedial treatment.
It goes back to what I said earlier, though. There are some areas where it's picking and choosing where you're going to be spending your limited resources and looking for breakthroughs. And it seems to me that vaccines against a disease, given that we've created vaccines against diseases already when people said that it was impossible, may be a more productive area to put money into than the idea of creating a force field. But if someone in private industry wants to start looking into that and they have some success, can prove some success, and they came to the government, and I would say, fine, go ahead, fund it. But it's just to me the basis of how we're going to solve the problem in the Korean Peninsula.
But your friends on the left have opposed everything concerning missile defense for 30 years.
Well, actually, they haven't.
Yes, they have.
No.
They have. They opposed everything.
It was still funding continued under Democratic presidents.
But it wasn't that they wanted it. They opposed it.
You can't
deny that. I mean, I could look at an issue of every issue.
But that may be a place where you can decide this is not where the breakthrough is probably going to come. It's not the best use of resources. And
right, but that wasn't the reason that the nation and Mother Jones opposed it.
Listen, there's no meeting that you're missing, Jim, where the single reason is hatched and everybody pledges allegiance to it.
Okay, I think that there's.
Richard Garland at MIT, the physicist up there, had was a very articulate foe on the physics of missile defense. The
point is, there's
and he's not sitting there because he wants to make the world a more dangerous place.
Like the oil spill, there are 50 different ways to do these things.
There's not 50 different ways, it seems.
Yes, there are. You could do force fields, you could do anti-missiles, you could do big nets. Who knows what you could do? You could do a million different things.
Okay, well, I wish I could cue up the Twilight Zone theme, but let's go out on a lighter note here. Because one of our great editors at Blogging Heads, as they often do before we're about to go on air, they send us an email and say, what do you think about this? And the email we got today was about the news. So far, I've only seen it reported in one source, that source being Politico, that Al Gore and Tipper Gore are separating. And that seems to be as much as we know. So you promised me some snark on this. So
well, I mean, again, just because we only have one data point shouldn't stop us, right?
Yeah.
I think that the big candidate for the revisionist biography. I know that Joe McGinnis is out there, snooping around on Sarah Palin, but the big, the person who's lived the most interesting life for the last 10 years, since he left the vice presidency, is Al Gore. He's gotten really, really rich, and he's made a movie, and he's won an Oscar, and he won a Nobel Peace Prize, and I'm sure that nobody has said a crossword to him to his face in a decade. And so I'm frankly not surprised that he and Tipper are splitting up. I just think that we'll wait for maybe the only journalistic outlet that will have the courage to dig into him will be the National Enquirer, which took down John Edwards. But I suspect we'll find some pretty interesting stuff about Gore when that journalistic process begins.
Did you mind when Dick Cheney got rich?
I don't think that I praised him for it. No.
Well, I didn't ask if you praised. I asked if you minded.
And I don't mind if Al Gore got rich if it weren't for the fact that he were trying to impose austerity on the rest of us.
Well, I've long said you can never tell what's happening within a marriage unless you're in it yourself. So,
so tell us.
So absent any information from any of the involved parties, I have no frickin' idea why this is happening. Not sure I even care that much. Maybe it has something to do with dirty rock and roll lyrics, but that's for the old timers out there.
Right.
But otherwise,
back in the LP era, yeah.
Yeah. But otherwise, I really don't know, and I assume though that this will take the course of all such stories, and there will be stories in the National Enquirer and elsewhere that may or may not be true. There will probably be an appearance by somebody on an Oprah show, Oprah-related show, and maybe there is a book. Maybe the person who will write the book you want to see used to sleep with the vice president. I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. There's a journalistic thread to tug on. If maybe Mother Jones won't do it, but somebody should.
Well, it seems that ex-political wives do quite well writing books.
Right. I think you might be alluding to Jenny Sanford. I'm probably leaving out a couple others too.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure there are others in the works. In fact,
Elizabeth
maybe
Edwards.
Adam Bello, our friend Adam Bello, can put together an imprint just for that.
Well, again, I think that the no public. It's hard to think of a public figure that's gotten a more fawning press in the last, I won't say 10 years, but 7 or 8 years than Al Gore. And therefore, if the nature of journalistic interest and the nature of irony is the gap.
Well, remember, more Americans wanted him to be president than George W. Bush.
Well. Again, I'm sure nobody's said.
And perhaps from your perspective, it would have been better had he become president, and he wouldn't have gone on to irritate you so much on the global warming front. But we're going to stay away from global warming. Why don't we call it a night?
All right, or an afternoon.
Whatever. And I wish Al and Tipper both well, and that whatever happens, it's easy.
We know they're going to move on. We know that. So
I'm not going to enjoy whatever they may be going through.
Anyway, right. So
we'll
agree on wishing them the best. Although I just wish that Al Gore would let the rest of us enjoy our lives more. But anyway,
I'll give you that last word. Okay, so I'll see you next time, Jim.
Till next time.
Okay, unless you're behind a force field or invisibility cloak.